If you think you know The Lord of the Rings, then think again. Most of us have seen the movies so many times that Peter Jackson's version has officially replaced the truth in our heads. You think Arwen saved Frodo? Nope. Faramir tried to take the ring? Never happened. The army of the dead won the Pelennor Fields? Not even close. Today, we're deprogramming the Hollywood lore and counting down 13 massive myths that the movies led you to believe, starting with one that is shockingly widespread even today. If you watch The Fellowship of the Ring, the visual pacing heavily implies a rapid, almost immediate sequence of events following Bilbo's 111th birthday party. Bilbo vanishes, Gandalf rides off to Minas Tirith, shuffles through some dusty old scrolls, and urgently gallops back to Bag End to thrust Frodo into his perilous quest. It feels like it takes, what, a few weeks maybe? Maybe a month? Well, in the original text, a massive 17 years passed between Bilbo leaving the Shire and Frodo packing his bags. Bilbo leaves in the year 3001 of the Third Age. Frodo doesn't step out of his front door until the year 3018. And here's the craziest part for movie-only fans. When Frodo finally sets off on the quest, he isn't a fresh-faced kid in his early 20s. He is exactly 50 years old, which is the precise age that Bilbo was when he went on his own adventure to the Lonely Mountain. So what was happening during those nearly 2 decades? Gandalf wasn't just on a quick library run, he was executing an exhaustive continent-spanning intelligence operation like only Gandalf can. And for those of you looking forward to the new Lord of the Rings movie, The Hunt for Gollum, this is exactly when that takes place. Gandalf enlists the help of Aragorn, and together the two of them spend years hunting the creature Gollum through the treacherous wilderness of Rhovanion and the Dead Marshes. All the while, Gandalf makes periodic, secretive visits back to the Shire, realizing with growing horror that the ring is unnaturally preserving Frodo's youth, just like it did to Bilbo. That's right, he wasn't just missing for 17 years, he actually came back every once in a while to hang out with Frodo, but never let him in on the secret of the ring. Now, to be fair to Peter Jackson, it makes total sense why this was cut. In a cinematic medium, dropping a 2-decade time jump right after your inciting incident completely kills the rising tension. Plus, the movie was already pushing 3 hours as is, so adding more stuff during this timeline just wasn't feasible. But in the book, Tolkien uses this massive chronological expanse to establish the sheer scale of the threat. It replaces the movie's jump scare pacing with a slow, creeping dread as Sauron's shadow slowly stretches across Middle-earth, and it serves as a chapter to help us learn more about Frodo. It's great for character building in the book, but not so great on screen. But our next myth brings up a change that diehard fans would argue was not a great choice for the screen, and that is Arwen's role. Think back to your first time watching The Fellowship of the Ring. One of the most iconic, pulse-pounding sequences is Arwen intercepting Aragorn in the wild, throwing a dying Frodo onto her horse, and outrunning the ring wraiths in a high-speed chase. She crosses the ford of Bruinen, draws her sword, and delivers the legendary line, "If you want him, come and claim him." And through Elrond, she summons a magical flood to wash the Nazgul away. It's an incredible cinematic moment. It's also entirely made up. In Tolkien's original text, Arwen was nowhere near the fort of Bruinen. The rescue was actually executed by an ancient, tremendously powerful elf lord named Glorfindel. And Glorfindel wasn't just some random scout. This guy was a legendary hero from the First Age who famously fought a Balrog to the death and then was sent back to Middle-earth by the Valar with almost godlike power. When Glorfindel finds the group, he puts Frodo on his elite white horse, Asfaloth, and commands the horse to bear the hobbit to safety. But this myth is bigger than just Arwen. You see, while a lot of people talk about how Arwen shouldn't have been there, I think something much more important about this moment was changed for the film. In the book, Frodo wasn't a passive, unconscious passenger. In the book, Frodo rides Asfaloth alone, and when he crosses the river, he turns the horse around, draws his own sword, and weakly but bravely defies the Nazgul by himself. It is a profound display of his spiritual and physical resilience. And that flood? Arwen didn't summon it. It was commanded by Elrond alone, and Gandalf added the magical shape of the white horses crashing down on the wraiths. Now, looking at this from a screenwriting perspective, it's easy to see why Peter Jackson made the swap. Glorfindel is insanely overpowered. Introducing a character with that much mythological weight, only for him to literally sit out the rest of the entire trilogy, would be incredibly confusing for a movie audience. Plus, swapping him for Arwen established her relationship with Aragorn early on. But still, this change remains one of the most fiercely debated topics in the fandom. By giving Arwen the spotlight, the films completely erased a legendary, fan favorite first-stage hero from live action. Even worse to some, it robbed Frodo of his ultimate moment of defiance, reducing him to a helpless victim rather than the resilient ring bearer that Tolkien wrote him to be. Both sides make a fair point, but I want to turn it over to you guys. Be honest, for the movies, who would you have rather seen at the Ford of Brunnen? Do you prefer Arwen getting the spotlight, or do you wish that we got to see Glorfindel in all his Balrog-slaying glory? Let me know in the comments. But don't linger there too long, because we've still got 11 more myths to cover, and they get more and more insane from here on out. If you've seen the extended edition of The Return of the King, you know that Saruman gets a dramatic cinematic send-off. Grima Wormtongue stabs him in the back, and he falls onto a giant spiked water wheel. It's a great visual, but it's completely fabricated. In the original text, Saruman actually survives the War of the Ring. He talks his way out of prison, travels to the Shire, and takes it over under the alias Sharky. When Frodo and the others finally return home, they have to organize a full-blown Hobbit rebellion to take their home back. After Saruman is defeated, he verbally abuses his servant one too many times, and Grima slits his throat right there on the doorstep of Bag End. Peter Jackson cut this scouring of the Shire sequence to keep the movie's pacing tight, but inventing the spike wheel death and cutting Saruman from the theatrical release caused a massive real-life rift behind the scenes. Christopher Lee, who famously read the books every single year, was absolutely furious about the change and even boycotted the final premiere in Wellington. The fallout between him and Peter Jackson is a fascinating piece of cinematic history. I actually made an entire video breaking down exactly what happened, so make sure to click the link in the description to check that out after this video. If there is one moment in The Two Towers that gives absolutely everyone chills, it's the climax at Helm's Deep. The fortress is breached, all hope is lost, and then, just as the sun rises, Gandalf appears on the eastern ridge. With him is Eomer, who had been banished from Rohan, returning with a massive host of cavalry to charge down an impossibly steep hill and shatter the Uruk-hai lines. Unfortunately, it never happened, at least like that. In Tolkien's original text, Eomer was never banished from Rohan. He was simply imprisoned inside Edoras by Wormtongue, but the moment that Gandalf arrives and heals King Theoden, Eomer is released. He doesn't ride away into the wilderness. Instead, he rides directly to Helm's Deep with King Theoden, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. That's right, during the entire grueling siege of the Hornburg, Eomer is already inside the fortress. He actually spends the battle fighting shoulder to shoulder with Aragorn and Gimli, forming a deep, blood-forged camaraderie as they defend the gates. He even retreats into the glittering caves with Gimli later on into the fight. So if Eomer is already inside, who arrived with Gandalf at the break of dawn? That honor belongs to a character who was completely erased from the films, Erkenbrand, the Lord of the Westfold. And to make this book version even more grounded, Gandalf and Erkenbrand didn't arrive with a pristine division of horse-mounted cavalry. They arrived with a massive force of weary, displaced infantry, foot soldiers who had been scattered during the previous battles across the land of Rohan. So why did Peter Jackson change it? Well, I believe it all comes down to emotional investment. Similarly to Glorfindel, introducing Erkenbrand, a completely new, previously unseen character, at the climax of the second film would require the audience to invest emotional capital in a total stranger. By swapping him for Eomer, the filmmakers engineered a highly satisfying, closed-loop resolution for Eomer's character arc. His cinematic banishment establishes just how crippling Grima's treason really is, and his triumphant return is a dramatic vindication of his loyalty to his uncle. Plus, let's be honest, a thunderous cavalry charge translates infinitely better to the big screen than a bunch of tired foot soldiers jogging down a steep hill. And now, speaking of character changes, let's talk about someone who might as well have been removed entirely due to all the drastic changes that were made to his character. Perhaps the most controversial character adaptation in the entire trilogy revolves around the Captain of Gondor. The movies portray Faramir as a deeply flawed, insecure man desperate to step out of his dead brother's shadow and win the approval of his cruel father Denethor. When he captures Frodo and Sam and discovers the One Ring, he completely succumbs to its temptation. He forcefully marches the hobbits to the besieged city of Osgiliath, intending to hand the ring over to Gondor, and only changes his mind after a direct attack from a Nazgul. It makes for a dramatic movie sequence, and one of the worst scenes in the entire trilogy in Osgiliath, but this might be the biggest character assassination in the entire story. In the original text, Faramir is defined by his profound wisdom, martial restraint, and unshakable moral compass. He never drags the hobbits to Osgiliath. When he discovers the true nature of Isildur's bane at the hidden refuge of Henneth Enon, he immediately and famously declares, "I would not take this thing if it lay by the highway. Not were Minas Tirith falling in ruin, and I alone could save her." He accurately recognizes the ring's insidious nature and lets Frodo and Sam continue their quest unhindered. He displays a remarkable, almost effortless immunity to the artifact's temptation, which we don't see in any other man in the story aside from Aragorn. The filmmakers changed this to manufacture cinematic tension, arguing that having a human simply shrug off the ring would lower the stakes of the story. But in doing so, they fundamentally missed the point of this character. In the books, Faramir represents the absolute highest ideals of men. Tolkien explicitly noted that the ancient blood of Westernesse, the blood of Númenor, ran nearly true in him. He was a student of Gandalf. He valued ancient lore and wisdom over brute martial glory. He was designed to be the ultimate enlightened foil to his brash brother Boromir. So, by forcing Faramir to fail the exact same test that his brother failed, the movie essentially turned him into Boromir 2.0, which is pretty much what Denethor is trying to do to him as well. But the story needed a human who could reject the ultimate evil. Faramir's textual purity proves that humanity isn't entirely weak or easily corrupted. It proves that humility and wisdom are the true antidotes to Sauron's power. And personally, I think he should have remained the beacon of hope that Tolkien wrote him to be. However, I will say that David Wenham did a great job portraying him in the films, even despite the changes made. There is arguably no weapon in fantasy history more iconic than the broken sword, Narsil. In the film adaptation, the shattered shards are treated like a museum exhibit, resting silently on a statue in Rivendell long after the Fellowship departs. It isn't until the eve of the final battles and the return of the king that Elrond finally reforges the blade. He then secretly rides to the encampment at Dun Harrow to hand it to Aragorn, urging him to finally embrace his royal destiny. It makes for an incredible Excalibur-style reveal, but chronologically, it is entirely backward. In the original text, the shards of Narsil aren't collecting dust on a statue. Aragorn actively carries the broken hilt and shards with him during his travels as a ranger. He even pulls the broken blade out to show the hobbits in Bree as definitive proof of his identity when they doubt him. Furthermore, the mastersmiths of Rivendell actually reforge the sword into Anduril before the Fellowship ever sets out on their journey south. That's right, from Rivendell onward, Aragorn proudly carries Anduril, the Flame of the West, at his side. So why did the films delay this crucial moment for so long? Well, it all comes down to a fundamental shift in Aragorn's character arc, which brings us to our seventh myth. When we meet Aragorn on screen, he is a brooding, deeply reluctant hero who fears his royal lineage. Haunted by the historical weakness of his ancestor, Isildur, the cinematic Aragorn actively shuns the throne of Gondor, preferring the obscure life of a ranger. It takes constant, intense pushing from figures like Arwen, Elrond, and Gandalf before he finally accepts his destiny and crown in the final act. This modern, relatable character arc is completely absent from the original story. From his very first introduction in the text, Aragorn is fully, unwaveringly committed to his grand destiny. He carries the shattered blade of his ancestors with immense pride and openly declares his concrete intentions to claim the throne. His entire life, including decades spent serving incognito in the armies of Rohan and Gondor, has been a meticulous preparation for his kingship. He isn't motivated by a paralyzing fear of Isildur's weakness. Instead, he is driven by a profound sense of duty and his deep, enduring love for Arwen. Elrond explicitly forbade their marriage until Aragorn achieved the seemingly impossible feat of becoming king of both Arnor and Gondor. The filmmakers restructured his personality to fit modern cinematic storytelling conventions. In classical literature, a hero who confidently pursues his defined destiny is widely admired, but modern audiences struggle to connect with characters lacking internal conflict. By making Aragorn doubt himself, the films provided a clear, relatable journey from self-doubt to self-actualization, tying his internal fears to the overarching threat of the ring. It works beautifully for the film, but fundamentally shifts Aragorn from a traditional mythic king into a modernized, reluctant protagonist. There is no character in the Peter Jackson trilogy who gets straight up disrespected quite as heavily as Denethor. If your only exposure to the Steward of Gondor is the films, you probably remember him as a gluttonous, cowardly old man who aggressively eats cherry tomatoes while his city burns. The movie version obstinately refuses to light the warning beacons, provides zero strategic defense, sends Faramir on a senseless suicide mission, and ultimately runs screaming off the precipice of Minas Tirith while completely engulfed in flames. But that is a massive departure from the man Tolkien actually wrote. The original Denethor is a masterful tactician, a brilliant leader, and a tragic hero possessing immense willpower. Fun fact, in the books, he had actually ordered the lighting of the beacons and successfully evacuated the non-combatant civilians long before Gandalf and Pippin ever arrived. So why did he lose his mind? It wasn't just grief or old age, it was the direct, tragic consequence of his covert use of one of the lost Palantiri. Denethor dared to use the Seeing Stone to glean vital intelligence for the defense of Gondor. While Sauron could not make the Palantir outright lie or completely dominate Denethor's formidable mind, he manipulated what Denethor saw. He showed the steward only the overwhelming, insurmountable might of Mordor's endless armadas. This relentless psychological warfare, combined with the devastating loss of Boromir and the apparent death of Faramir, drove Denethor to utter, calculated despair. But in the book, he dies with grim dignity by burning himself on a pyre inside the hallowed Rath Dinnan. He never does a flaming swan dive off the edge of the city. He literally sits there holding the Seeing Stone and burns alive without flinching. The filmmakers likely removed the Palantir from this storyline because introducing a second operational Seeing Stone in an already complex political narrative might dilute the pacing of the massive siege. However, without the necessary context of Sauron's psychological warfare, the movie risked Denethor appearing as a one-dimensional, cartoonish antagonist whose actions stem from petty cruelty, rather than a brilliant mind broken by an unbearable, self-imposed burden. And real quick, I just want to jump in here and clarify that I love the movies. I kind of have to do this every time I make a video comparing the movies to the books because people get the idea that I'm just hating on the films all the time, when in reality, it's my favorite trilogy ever made. So just because I'm nerding out over the changes doesn't mean I hate Peter Jackson's version. It's just when compared to Tolkien's epic story, I'm always going to side with Tolkien, and I think Jackson would too. There's just no beating his original tale. But anyway, with that important message out of the way, let's jump into myth number 9, which perfectly encapsulates this dichotomy of film versus book storytelling. Of all the changes made to the trilogy, none sparked quite as much outrage from literary purists or as many tears from casual viewers as the stairs of Cirith Ungol. While ascending the physically exhausting steps, Gollum devises a plot to frame Samwise Gamgee for the eating of their last vital Lembas bread. Frodo, heavily corrupted by the oppressive weight of the ring and manipulated by Gollum's whispers, loses all his faith in his loyal companion. He explicitly commands a heartbroken Sam to go home, leaving Frodo to enter Shelob's dark lair completely alone. It's a completely devastating scene, but this heartbreaking separation never actually occurs in the book. In fact, it's the complete opposite. Despite the immense, soul-sapping psychological toll of the ring, the textual Frodo never once doubts Sam's fundamental loyalty, nor does he ever send Sam away. Their bond remains absolute and unbreakable. Gollum leads them into Shelob's lair together, and the two hobbits navigate the suffocating, pitch-black tunnels side by side, relying on each other and the File of Galadriel. It is only the sheer, sudden chaos of the giant spider's ambush that physically separates them in the dark. This divergence is fascinating because the choices made for both the book and movie fit their respective mediums pretty well. In Tolkien's work, the pure, unwavering friendship between Frodo and Sam is the spiritual anchor of the narrative. It acts as an unassailable bastion against the pervasive corruption of Mordor. For a literary epic, keeping this bond unbroken is essential because it proves that steadfast fellowship can withstand the ultimate evil. However, internal struggles are notoriously difficult to convey on screen. The filmmakers manufactured this acute interpersonal conflict to display the psychological toll that the ring was taking on Frodo. After all, they couldn't just have 3 movies of Frodo walking to Mordor without any representation of it taking a toll on him. So, in the cinematic universe, the ring acts much like a real-world addiction. It warps the mind, breeds intense paranoia, and forces the victim to isolate themselves from the people who love them most. By forcing Frodo to hit absolute rock bottom emotionally before entering the lair, it heightens the immediate dramatic tension. It elevates Sam's eventual epic return, framing it not just as a continuation of his quiet loyalty, but as a massive, heroic triumph over a bitter betrayal. And it's a sequence of scenes that makes me want to cry almost every time. Now, after that depressing myth, let's dry our eyes and add some levity to this conversation by discussing a more fun and intriguing myth that many fans still haven't discovered. In the movies, Meriadoc Brandybuck and Peregrine Took remain standard Hobbit height throughout the entire trilogy. Sure, there's a brief scene in the extended edition of The Two Towers where they drink some mysterious Ent water and have a comedic squabble about growing taller, but the films treat this strictly as a temporary, humorous gag with no lasting physical consequence. But the truth is far more legendary. The Ent drafts they consume in the deep shade of Fangorn Forest cause a profound, permanent alteration to their physiology. Because the Ent draft possess the ancient, potent magic of the Ents, they stimulate unprecedented physical growth. Merry and Pippin actually grow to be the absolute tallest hobbits in recorded history. They even surpass the legendary bull roarer Took, who is 4 foot 5 inches tall and famously large enough to ride a full-sized horse. Post-war records in the Red Book of Westmarch indicate Merry and Pippin reaching a towering height of at least 4.5 feet. In the text, this permanent physical growth serves as a vital literary metaphor for their internal maturation. They depart the Shire as mischievous, relatively innocent youths, but return as seasoned, worldly knights of Rohan and Gondor. Their enhanced physical stature symbolically represents their expanded worldview and the grim martial experience they gained while walking among men, Ents, and orcs. So why did Peter Jackson ignore this? Simply put, it's just not important enough to the plot for them to care about. It would have taken time and resources to explain this plot development to the audience, and then shoot every remaining scene with Merry and Pippin being slightly taller than they were before. So I get why they cut it. But you know what's not a small little change? Having the Army of the Dead insta-win a massive battle for you. If you ask a casual fan what ultimately won the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, they will almost certainly point to the invincible, glowing green army of ghosts. In the film's climax, Aragorn leads the spectral forces of the dead directly onto the blood-soaked plains, where they wash over the armies of Mordor like a tidal wave. They effortlessly swarm the orcs and bring down the massive Mumakil, single-handedly saving Minas Tirith from total annihilation before Aragorn releases them from their curse. But sadly, this completely undermines the core theme of the entire battle. In Tolkien's original text, the army of the dead never sets foot on the Pelennor Fields, not even once. Aragorn actually utilizes the dead solely to secure the southern port city of Pelargir, and they don't fight like a physical swarm of insects either. Their primary weapon is paralyzing supernatural terror. They frighten the Corsairs of Umbar into jumping overboard and running, allowing Aragorn to commandeer their massive fleet of black ships. Once the ships are fully secured, Aragorn immediately considers their oath fulfilled and releases the spirits to their rest right then and there. The ghosts never lay a physical finger on anyone. So who was actually on those black ships when they arrived at Minas Tirith? Living, breathing men. Aragorn fills the captured fleet with hundreds of reinforcements from the southern fiefdoms of Gondor, men who had been pinned down by the Corsair threat or enslaved by them. It is this massive army of mortal men arriving under the banner of the king that ultimately turns the tide and wins the battle. But the battle didn't end quickly. It was so grueling and intense that Tolkien makes a point to say that Aragorn, Eomer, and Prince Imrahil were some of the only men to make it out unscathed. So why the drastic change? Well, ultimately, I think it comes down to runtime. They were grappling with a staggering length of film and needed a highly expedited method to cleanly resolve the largest battle in cinematic history. While this is a very cool visual on screen and does indeed help the runtime, it severely dilutes the ultimate triumph of humanity. A fundamental theme of Tolkien's work is the painful, earned transition into the Age of Men. The monumental victory at Minas Tirith was supposed to be achieved through the blood, sacrifice, and unyielding valor of mortal men uniting against the darkness. Allowing a consequence-free ghost army to effortlessly clean up the battlefield completely negates the immense sacrifices made by the Rohirrim and the defenders of Gondor. If one image defines the entire cinematic trilogy, it's the massive, flaming eyeball suspended atop Barad-dûr. The films treat the eye as a sweeping spotlight, heavily implying Sauron completely lost his physical body. It's a terrifying visual, but it's pretty inaccurate. In the text, the quote, Eye of Sauron is primarily a metaphor for his oppressive will and the emblem on his orcish shields. Sauron himself undeniably possesses a physical humanoid form. Tolkien explicitly clarified this in one of his letters, saying the form he took was that of a man of more than human stature, but not gigantic. Even Gollum, who was personally tortured in Barad-dûr, saw the Dark Lord and confirmed his lingering injuries from Isildur's blade, stating he has only 4 on the Black Hand, but they are enough. So why the giant lighthouse? It was a pragmatic, visual choice. Since the main antagonist never directly fights our heroes, the filmmakers literalized Tolkien's metaphor to provide a tangible on-screen threat. And to be honest, I think this works better in the film than just being like, oh, he's in the tower. You can't see him at all during these movies, but trust me, he's there. It at least gave us a way to interact with the villain of the series, and a way for Frodo to see him. But what do you think about the eye? Do you think it was good for the film? Let me know in the comments. And now we come to our final myth, and honestly one of the craziest ones so far. So buckle up and get ready, because we're about to talk about the Elves and Arwen at Helm's Deep. Just as the situation at Helm's Deep appears utterly hopeless and the defenders are preparing to be slaughtered, a horn sounds in the distance. Haldir arrives leading a heavily armored, perfectly synchronized battalion of Galadriel archers from Lothlorien to honor the ancient alliance between elves and men. Then they engage in the brutal, muddy siege, suffering massive casualties, culminating in the tragic, slow-motion death of Haldir himself. It is an undeniably hype-inducing cinematic moment, but it completely breaks the lore. And on top of that, the entire reason that this scene came about is probably in the top 3 most interesting behind-the-scenes facts for the film trilogy. So if you haven't heard it before, get ready for your mind to be blown. To back up into Tolkien's original text, no elven army ever fought at Helm's Deep, and Haldir certainly didn't die defending the Hornburg. Legolas was the absolute sole elf present at the battle. The defense of the fortress was entirely a desperate, gritty effort of the Rohirrim, aided only by Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas. So where were the elves? Well, during this exact timeline in the book, the elves of Lothlorien and Thranduil's realm in Mirkwood were fighting their own massive, desperate battles against Sauron's forces originating from Dol Guldur in the northern theater of the war. By the way, I have a whole video detailing the battles that took place in the north and occupied the elves and dwarves, so if you're interested in that, check the description. Anyway, the real reason the elves are at Helm's Deep in the movie is a fascinating, messy piece of behind-the-scenes trivia. Originally, they had written in that Arwen would lead the elves to Helm's Deep to fight alongside her beloved Aragorn. And guess what? They filmed it. But after looking at the scenes in the editing room, the filmmakers eventually realized that transforming Arwen into a warrior princess deviated way too radically from the overarching tone of the story. So they completely retconned her out of the sequence. Though if you look closely, you can still faintly spot her in several wide combat shots. Here's the problem. The intricate logistics, expensive choreography, and massive battle sequences were already built entirely around the presence of the elven archers. The production was essentially stuck with the elves. They weren't going to go completely rebuild the massive Helm's Deep set, hire hundreds of extras, train them all, fly the actors back in, and completely refilm this epic battle. So to salvage the expensive footage, they went and reshot the scenes, swapping Arwen with Haldir. But Haldir isn't in the rest of the film, so just kill him off, I guess? Yep, that'll solve it. In the books, Haldir doesn't die because he never showed up to Helm's Deep in the first place. And to be honest, I'm curious what the storyline was going to be for Arwen. They obviously couldn't have killed her off, but if she came to fight at Helm's Deep, then why wouldn't she just follow Aragorn on the paths of the dead and so on? So I wonder what their original excuse was going to be for her to return to Rivendell. Anyway, this panicked retcon created a massive, strange plot hole for the films. If a perfectly trained elven army could casually march all the way down to Helm's Deep to help Rohan, why didn't a single elf show up at Minas Tirith? Ultimately, while Jackson utilized this change to visually convey that the elves were still actively participating in the war, it directly contradicted Tolkien's textual theme for the battle. Once again, this fight was meant to prove that men were finally being forced to learn to stand alone and defend themselves as the elves inevitably faded from the world. But what did you think about this change? How would you have liked it if Arwen just randomly showed up at Helm's Deep? Let me know in the comments. And while you're at it, drop a like and subscribe. My name is Gibby, and this is my channel, Factor Fantasy, where I talk about all things Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. If you like other movies, music, and TV shows, subscribe to my new channel, Gibby. And if you like Harry Potter, then check out Factor Fantasy Harry Potter. Pretty much no matter what you're into, I've probably got something for you. So turn on those notifications and stay tuned for future uploads. Thank you to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, RoboSteve, Drix, and the rest of my incredible Patreon and YouTube members who help make these videos possible every month. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.